All right, well, welcome to today's class. My name is Dan Kellams, and I got Darlene Iriarty with us. She's our nutritionist and wellness coach extraordinaire. And today we are talking about focusing on the gut. So, in our program, the gut is so critical. It's such a big piece that is one of the central pieces we start with. And a lot of people want to skip over and just get right to other problems. But, your health really, not just your health, but your longevity is really determined upon the health of the gut. I mean, what would you say about that?
Everything is related to our gut health, and then we'll see brain health, and then also obviously digestion. But one thing that people learn is that if there's some issues going on with the gut, like you were alluding to, we can't really go further because everything else is dependent on that. So yeah, got to take that step.
Gut is, they say it's your second brain, and I always joke because you hear people say, trust your gut. But I'm going to tell you, we look at people's guts all the time, and there's a lot of you out there that probably should not trust your gut. I think it's pretty scary. So let's do a little bit of an overview of the digestive process. Now, so you eat food, and then food immediately starts to break down because you have enzymes in your saliva, and then you have enzymes in your stomach as well. And the enzymes are organic molecules that speed up or assist a chemical process. And in this particular instance, is to dissolve or break down the bonds in our food. So our food can be broken down into small molecules so it can be absorbed. So first digestive enzymes do that, and then you have stomach acid as well. And that acid further damages the food or breaks it down. It can damage it, but that's why we want the acidity to be balanced, right? So the digestion starts the minute you put something in your mouth, and then it hits the stomach. Stomach acid further breaks it down. You got these enzymes, and on here, you see these little sweeper guys. And those sweeper guys are different types of enzymes, pepsin and lipase, and you got amylase that comes out of your saliva. And then what's supposed to happen is that food is broken down into super small molecules. Then it's supposed to be able to get into the small intestine. And this is really key because if you have weak stomach acid, which is the number one cause of acid reflux, it's not hyperacidity, it's actually hypoacidity. And so what happens is if the acidity is not strong enough to break down food, food sets in the stomach, the body makes more acid. It's just a weak acid. And so you can start getting acid reflux. But if the acidity or the pH level is correct, it'll break down the food, right?
Mm-hmm.
What were you going to say?
No, I was listening. I was making sure that you said.
All right, just make sure she's making sure that I'm saying it correctly. She's not only our wellness coach, our nutritionist, but she's also my grammar coach. So gotta love it. So anyway, so it breaks down. The small particles get into the small intestine. The small intestine is a huge sponge, but it also has more, if you see those little sweeper guys, has more digestive enzymes. And then what happens is what's left over that goes into the colon, into your large intestine, and you'll see these like little bitty Pac-Men, and those are the bacteria in your gut. And what their job is to do is to make some of those food particles bioavailable. But the bacteria, the role of the bacteria is huge, right? They say that the weight of the brain is equivalent to the weight of all the bacteria in your digestive tract. And then so it goes through, you absorb, you excrete. So the large intestine and the small intestine is mainly a sponge. The large intestine, where all this bacteria is housed, is an intelligent filter, and it takes in nutrients and it gets rid of waste. And that's super important because that's how you detoxify. It's the last phase of detoxification. And that's why one of the key pieces in getting your health back has to rely on getting that gut so healthy, because those gut bacteria do so many things. They make things bioavailable. They release chemicals that regulate your health. But the gut is going to be able to get your nutrients in and get your waste products out. So you never work on the liver first, because if you speed up the liver process of detoxification, and then your gut can't properly get rid of the waste, you reabsorb it and you damage the liver again. So that's the process in whole. So there's two major aspects of the large intestine, the gut. So you have this permeable membrane that absorbs and eliminates, right? We just said that. It's that intelligent filter. And then you have the microbiome, and that's all of the bacteria. And there's trillions of bacteria, right? Mm-hmm. It's like they regulate your body. There's more bacterial DNA in your body than you have of your own DNA. So that's pretty crazy. So you got these two things that are really important to keep healthy. So what makes it dysfunction, right? What are the triggers of dysfunction? And there's, we talk about the 5 major triggers, but today we're going to talk about the 4 stressors. And this kind of makes it a little bit simpler of an idea to take in. So you have physical stress, right? Mm-hmm. We all have physical stress. So all these little traumas. And how would physical stress affect the digestive tract?
Well, any kind of physical stress gives us inflammation. Mm-hmm. It triggers the inflammatory cascades. And if there's inflammation in one area, it's systemic. So here we are with the gut.
Yep. Yeah, and another piece is like, you say, okay, if you have thyroid issues, where your thyroid? Your thyroid's here. Well, where are the nerves that control that thyroid? They're in the neck. So if you have neck pain, you might have decreased, thyroid output. That's going to affect digestive enzymes and stomach acid and intestinal motility. If you have upper back pain or mid back pain, those nerves, they control the stomach, so that can affect digestion. Lower back's going to control the large intestine and the small intestine. So if you have low back pain, so these physical traumas, those can also disrupt, or maybe it's the nerves that lead to the pancreas that produces your enzyme. So physical stress, not only creating systemic inflammation, but pinpointed stress and damage is going to affect the way that the brain communicates and regulates your digestive process and all of your other organs, right? What about chemical stress? Where do we get chemical stress?
Everywhere. As soon as we get out of bed,
yep,
walk and start our day.
It's even before you get out of bed, right?
Yeah.
You got, off gassing from your mattress. So you got chemicals in the air, the food, the water, so all these things. So anything that we can do to help us minimize the chemical stress on the body is super important, because we're breathing it in all day. And I mean, the air quality is crazy. If you have like some of the natural fires that happen, or the pollution, it's putting all this stuff in the air. So there's so many areas of stress. And that, if it's accumulated and your body can't properly regulate it, you're going to get inflammation. Then you have emotional stress, right? Nobody has.
Not anyone.
Nobody has emotional stress. Not around here, right? And then pathogenic stress. So maybe you have the wrong type of microbes in your gut, not enough of the good ones. Maybe you have chronic, latent viruses in your body, like Lyme's disease. Well, Lyme's is going to be bacteria, but mono, Epstein-Barr virus, or cytomegalovirus, or varicella zoster, the virus that gave you chickenpox. So all these things are pathogenic. So mold's another excellent, good point. So any of these stressors create inflammation. And when you get inflammation, it causes the gut to leak. It increases the space in your cells. So that permeable membrane that we were talking about, it becomes weak. These junctions, they're called actomyosin bridges. These actomyosin bridges, they break up because of stress and inflammation. So what we end up in this situation is you have leaky gut. And now your gut is no longer an intelligent filter. It's not absorbing your nutrients. It's not getting rid of your waste. And you might actually be absorbing some of the breakdown of your stool, right? How nasty is that, You ask somebody, how do you think you're going to feel if you're absorbing your stool? You're going to feel like poop, right? So it's a crazy thing. And the bad thing about it is that bridge those bridges between those cells is very similar to the same bridges in your brain. So the blood-brain barrier becomes weak when the gut becomes weak. And, I've said it a lot of times when I say fire in the gut, fire in the brain, right? So you get that process. So then what happens, right? You get this dysfunction. Now we have a real problem, because the gut is going to send more information from the gut to the brain than the other way around, and your gut's on fire. So you're going to get irritability. You're going to have mood swings. Your gut produces 90% of your serotonin. We're going to talk about that. So you're going to have trouble with sleeping because you can't make melatonin. Focus is going to be off, right? Brain fog. And you're not going to necessarily get all of these. It could be a little bit hit and miss. You might get gas and bloating. That might be it. Maybe some loose stool, constipation, it can be anything. But the thing is when the gut is not working properly, that means the rest of the body is going to suffer. And this creates diseases. It's not just you don't feel good, you're creating a disease process, right? Isn't it crazy how many people don't know that, right?
Yeah.
So, if we were on a one team, mission in the world, it would be to teach people your gut may be and is possibly the major cause of the failure of your health and the cause of disease. So when you get leaky gut, because you got systemic inflammation, you dysregulate your immune system because gut bacteria, they also will affect the way your immune system is regulated. That's why for autoimmunity, to stop it, prevent it, or make it better, the gut has to be one of your focuses, right? But your gut bacteria also get rid of excess hormones. They help regulate hormone balance. So whether it's hormones or autoimmunity or brain fog or all these things, the gut is related to it. So you can get depression and anxiety. You can get skin issues, thyroid issues, fertility issues. All of these things go back to the gut because if you don't have the nutrients you need, you're triggering inflammation, you can't regulate your hormones and make neurotransmitters, well, your body just doesn't work, right? So gluten, I just want to spend a minute and talk about gluten. Maybe, what do you think about gluten?
Well, what I tell people is that gluten is something that even if you're without celiac disease, there's still a lot of research that shows it does affect the tight junctions, and then that creates the leaky gut. So as we continue to improve digestion, it's a good idea to keep it out.
Yeah. So gluten has been attributed to every one of these things in research. So I want to go back to this one slide on the permeable membrane. So I'm going to focus right here and talk to you about this. What gluten does, modern wheat affects these bridges and makes them just open up because it releases a chemical called zonulin. And zonulin just opens up these pathways. So what happens is instead of food being absorbed into the intestinal cell and then be passed into the bloodstream, it gets like this back alley that just opens up and things go straight into the bloodstream. So undigested food particles, bacteria, waste, all this goes into your bloodstream and your blood goes everywhere. So all this stuff's going to go everywhere. And that's how you're going to feel like crap is circulating everywhere in your body. Now, what's particularly interesting about gluten is the gluten molecule looks like areas of your body, like your brain or your lungs or your skin or your intestinal tract. So if your immune system makes a flag or an antibody to tell your immune system to attack the gluten, you may also be telling your immune system to attack your brain, your skin, your intestines, or your pancreas. It's crazy. So that triggers this crazy stress cycle, right? So what happens is either stress, like down here you see the infection or the leaky gut, or maybe even just a sterile injury. This creates stress and releases all these different things in the body. And so the signaling goes all the way up to the brain, and that triggers an actual stress response in the brain. So it's crazy because food can create the same stress response as an argument or a fight or an emotional stressor, right?
Yeah, any of that. And that's why we have to pay attention to the gut-brain connection.
Yeah. It's crazy. So any of those stressors, chemical, physical, emotional, pathogenic, they can make you have the same response as an emotional stressor, right? So let that sink in for a minute. That means you can wake up in the morning, be irritated, feel like you just got in a fight, just really emotional because of what you ate or did or was exposed to 48 hours ago, right? What you do today can ruin your weekend. How does that sound, right? It sounds horrible. But what you do today can also set you up for more success for your weekend, right? So holidays are killer, right? That's why we all need a break after the holidays from our family. So let's talk about what are these symptoms of inflammation. You're going to get depression and anxiety, right? Because neurotransmitters can be disrupted. Nervous and emotional, right? Like we said, stress is triggering it, right? Mm-hmm. Headaches. How often should we get headaches?
Never.
You
Unless someone hits you over the head.
Right. Yeah. You should never get a headache, right? Unless you bump your head. And that's another problem entirely. So you shouldn't be bumping your head, right? No headaches. Headaches they're very common, but they're not healthy and they're not natural, right? Tired and sluggish, right? Why tired and sluggish? How is inflammation and leaky gut going to cause fatigue?
Well, when you're inflamed, then all the cells in your body are inflamed. And so how do you function if you have that?
Right. So the cells can't do their job. So they're not getting the nutrients they need. And also, this is going to really affect your sleep quality. So people will say, I slept for hours and I wake up and I don't feel rested, right? Yeah. There's so many different aspects. Constipation, right? That's a symptom of inflammation because the gut's not working. And loose stool, same way, right? And then mood swings. And if you've ever been to any of my live seminars, I like talking about this slide because how often should mood swings happen?
Not at all.
No. And I like this because I always say that the mood never swings in the opposite way, right? I mean, how many of you have ever had a mood swing and it was the best mood swing ever? You just were like, I'm the happiest version of myself. You know, nobody ever comes home and their spouse or their family, their significant other is ever like, good news, I had a major mood swing today and it swung the right direction, right?
Never. It's still there.
Yeah. Never swings that way. So it's the silliest thing. Weight gain. Now, I think this is important to talk about because if you can't regulate your hormones correctly, right? We talk about estrogen being activated and overactivated by gut bacteria. If there's too much gram-negative bacteria, you can't get rid of the conjugated hormones, so they get reabsorbed, so hormones fluctuate all over the place, right? Mm-hmm. Toxins, you get rid of toxins through your gut, and toxins can be endocrine disruptors. But also the thyroid, right? And you can get blood sugar resistance because of the gut, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So
because of the conversion also.
Yeah, so it's important at this point to talk a little bit about the weight. Like, where do you put that weight on? So the adrenals. So if you're having a stress response, it could be causing leaky gut, or because of the inflammation caused from leaky gut can cause a stress response, right? That's a vicious cycle, right? Yeah, cortisol weaken that bind, but then because the bound is, the binding between those cells is weakened, that permeable membrane, it's going to create inflammation within, drives a stress response. So it's a nasty cycle. And that's why a lot of people, they end up at our office or under care here with us, either, locally or virtually, because they can't seem to stop the cycle. And this is just one of the cycles that happens. But so you're going to put weight on around that lower belly. The ovarian body, this is excess estrogen. Like we said, gram-negative bacteria are responsible for activating, and then the health of the gut is responsible for getting rid of excess, right?
Yeah.
Thyroid. 20% of your thyroid hormone is converted in your gut. And then the thyroid regulates the movement of the gut. If the gut doesn't move, the gut becomes leaky. And if the gut gets leaky, the inflammation messes with the thyroid. And then you got another nasty cycle. So there's two nasty cycles right there that most people get plagued with, right? These will definitely affect things like fertility or miscarriages or just overall vitality, your health, your memory, all these things, right? Energy, autoimmunity. And then the last one is the liver, right? That's you're going to be, not being able to get rid of waste product. That's going to be insulin resistance. So some toxicity there. So gut issues can lead to weight gain because they affect every hormone in the body and they affect the gut. So it can get you in that vicious cycle. And I want to talk a minute about how important this is because, especially gut bacteria, because the gut bacteria do so many roles. They regulate your fat set point. But one of the things that they do is you have different types of gut bacteria. You have like 4 different major classifications, but 2 that we talk about a lot. They're the most dominant. They make up like 70 to 80% of the bacteria in the gut. And that's firmicutes and bacteroidetes, right? What is the thing we say about firmicutes?
they're not firm and cute. They don't help you stay firm and cute.
Right. So what that means, and this is the study they did. So check this out. This is really cool. They did a study on rats, and then they later on they replicated the same study in humans. And what they found was firmicutes actually produce more calories than you eat. So let's say you eat a 500 calorie meal. And I don't know what the ratios could be all over the place depending on how heavy those firmicutes are. But you could eat a 500 calorie meal and actually absorb or take in more calories than you actually ate. Because by the time the firmicutes process that food, they're going to make extra calories. But there's another type of bacteria that does the opposite. You know those people that can eat anything and never gain weight? Mm-hmm. Bacteroidetes. So they will only end up with less calories than you ate. Just the opposite of the firmicutes. But you can remember, because firmicutes won't let you be firm and cute, right? Good little way to do it. So you need a good balance. The gut is about balance. You need both. Just like you need gram-negative and gram-positive. But it's about balance. They all have their role. But if the gut bacteria is altered, you get altered fermentation, and you also get increased energy harvest, so you gain more fat, right? It's crazy, and you get inflammation. So those gut bacteria, we said that 20% of this inactive thyroid hormone right here, what it does is it gets converted by the gut bacteria. So if the gut bacteria is altered or damaged, or you have dysbiosis or inflammation in the gut, there's 20% of your energy. I mean, how many people you think come in could use 20% more energy?
Just a little bit.
Right?
20% is a lot for a lot of these people.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge significant change. If you had 20% more energy, you could show up, you'd have the patience and the energy to be and do what you want, right? I think that's super important. But we talked about toxins, and that's 60% conversion in the liver. But that's the gut bacteria doing that, right? That's what's crazy. So when you get these stressors, we said stress will trigger leaky gut, and then leaky gut causes more stress response. So inflammation and cortisol, they actually start inhibiting the brain and the thyroid communication and conversion of thyroid hormone. So cortisol and stress, not only do they affect the way the brain communicates to the thyroid and the way the thyroid converts to the active form, but then it also disrupts the gut in a whole other process. So just from cortisol and stress, you can develop full-on hypothyroidism. Nothing else in the body, no problems with your thyroid at all. And so what's the thyroid in control of? Well, all these things. And this is that nasty cycle, because proper stomach acid, you remember how important that was for breaking down food into small particles? And the GI function, but all these other things, because which cells do we say the thyroid controls?
Everything.
Every cell in the body. Nothing can get away from it, right? So it's crazy. So with that, let's talk about our process of how we heal the gut and why it, you know the why. So let's talk about the how. The first is you have to identify sources of stress and inflammation and start reducing those, because we said fire in the gut, fire in the brain. How do we identify sources of inflammation?
Well, we have comprehensive blood labs that identify all of the inflammatory markers, and then we look at the stool.
Yep. That
will give us a lot of information about the gastric inflammation and all the bacteria that's there or not there. The antibodies, but also the saliva that also helps us identify.
Yeah, because we say, with those, you got the 4 stressors, but the 5 triggers are foods, bugs, stress hormones, and toxins. So we try to look at the whole gamut. And if there seems to be a genetic trigger, then we'll look at genetics. If it seems like, later on when we get going, if we feel like we need a deep dive and look at the specific neurotransmitters or look at heavy metals, we also do some organic acids testing for those, right? Yeah. But that's enough that we get a picture. We can go, we know what your triggers are. And then once we know the triggers, most of you have understood that's how we develop the game plan, because we got the framework of the 5 pillars, but that depends on you. So the next step then we start healing the gut. And we do that by getting the right nutrients. A lot of times we use the Repair and Clear kit. What are some of the individual nutrients that actually can tighten the gut barrier?
L-glutamine is really great.
Right.
That's something that we give with some of the healing herbs, like the marshmallow extract. Um, and of course, the probiotics that we have.
Yep.
That's
Absolutely.
helpful.
Yeah. So specifically on those membranes, you need good micronutrients, but like collagen breaks down into glycine and glutamine, and those will help tighten up that gut barrier, right? So you want to identify all the nutrient deficiencies because vitamin D plays a role in it. Zinc, all these other vitamins, they play a role in that gut barrier being healthy. So bone broth is a really good way to tighten up the membrane. So the second thing is once you identify triggers, then you start healing the barrier. Now we tighten up that permeable membrane. We also want to look at the interference between the brain and the body, right? So looking at neurotransmitters, looking to see how the thyroid's working. If people are coming into the office, we'll use acupuncture. We want to know where their body pain is at. We may recommend chiropractic or physical therapy. In our program, we recognize that exercise is super key because motion is lotion for your back. And getting people moving or stretching or walking is super critical. So, making sure that your body has what it needs to be able to communicate is super key. So then, once we got communication going, once we have the barriers tightened up and we've identified sources, then, like Darlene said, we add in probiotics. And we look at very specific probiotics. At first, we're looking at ones that have good surface adhesion. They can actually create colonies in the gut. They can recolonize. We also want to look at ones that can adhere in there, ones that produce good bacteria. They're going to produce more good bacteria. They're going to produce more good butyrate, your postbiotics. And then when we get into the brain and nervous system health, we've identified the bacteria that produce the healthy neurotransmitters like serotonin, melatonin, dopamine, and GABA, and acetylcholine. So what we're trying to do is, in the end, is make your gut and your body a factory for making most of the things that you need so you don't have to rely on taking supplements the rest of the life, right?
Yeah.
So those are anything you want to add to the first 4 steps?
No, I think it's all highlighting how important the process is and what needs to happen to clear out what's not supposed to be there and then help repair so that the absorption can happen.
That's right. So, and that's where we get to the last phase, brain and nervous system health. And that's our last pillar. So we already talked about that. So that's pretty much it for today's class. Dysfunction or physiology. When these things are off, you got all these different triggers and they disrupt the GI system. All the way over here, it'll trigger depression and anxiety. And that's overall how the gut brain and this relationship with autoimmune disorders and infertility and chronic disease, how those occur. So that was a good class.
Yeah.
I love this class. This is fun stuff. So hope everybody got some great information. For those of you that were on here live, really happy to have you on. Glad you were on here today. And for those that are watching the recorded version, hope you got some great information. Give us some feedback. Reach out to us. Everybody, have an awesome day. We'll talk to you soon.